The flickering screen cast an eerie blue glow across Michael Jackson's face as he watched yet another news report about his supposed death. From his secluded villa in the south of France, he observed the world mourning him with a mixture of guilt and relief. The elaborate plan had worked perfectly, perhaps too perfectly. As millions of fans gathered across the globe to grieve, the king of pop sat very much alive, sipping chamomile tea and contemplating the extraordinary series of events that had led him to this moment. June 25, 2009, was supposed to be the day Michael Jackson died, but it was actually the day he truly began to live. The pressure had become unbearable: mounting debts, the looming 50-show residency in London, the constant scrutiny, and the endless tabloid headlines. Something had to give. With the help of a small, trusted circle, his longtime security chief, a brilliant makeup artist, and a doctor who understood the burden of fame, Michael orchestrated his own disappearance. The body double, a man with similar build and features, had been carefully chosen months in advance. The cocktail of drugs found in the substitute system matched Michael's known prescriptions perfectly. Even the slight vitiligo patterns had been meticulously recreated. The real Michael Jackson was spirited away during the chaos, leaving behind a world that would spend years dissecting every detail of his death. Now, 15 years later, Michael lived a life he had never known possible. Gone were the elaborate costumes and the signature silver glove. Instead, he wore simple linen shirts and comfortable slacks, his face transformed through subtle but effective prosthetics that allowed him to move through the world as Marcus Jensen, a reclusive American writer. His new appearance was neither shocking nor memorable, just another middle-aged man with graying temples and laugh lines around his eyes. The villa, nestled in the hills above Nice, became his sanctuary. Here, he could dance in his private studio without the weight of perfection crushing him. He could sing without worry about his voice being analyzed by critics. He could wake up when he wanted, eat what he pleased, and most importantly, he could watch his children grow up from afar, their lives unfolding through carefully gathered intelligence reports and distant photographs. But isolation, even self-imposed, carries its own burden. Michael found himself increasingly drawn to his old compositions, spending hours in his studio reworking classics and creating new pieces that would never see the light of day. The music refused to stay buried, flowing through his fingers like an unstoppable force, demanding to be heard. The first crack in his resolve appeared when Paris, his daughter, began her acting career. He watched every interview, noting how she spoke about him with a mixture of love and lingering questions. She seemed to sense something that others had missed, some detail that didn't quite fit in the official story of his death. The way she would sometimes pause before answering questions about him, her eyes carrying a hint of doubt that made his heart ache. Then came the rumors. They started as whispers on obscure fan forums, supposed sightings, conspiracy theories, and detailed analyses of his death that came uncomfortably close to the truth. Most were easily dismissible, but some contained fragments of reality that made Michael nervous. Had someone recognized his distinctive dance moves when he thought himself alone in his garden? Had his occasional midnight piano sessions carried too far on the Mediterranean breeze? The tipping point arrived on a warm spring evening in 2024. Michael was browsing through his daily news summary when he saw it: unreleased Michael Jackson track surfaces, AI or hidden treasure? The article discussed a new song that had appeared on an anonymous music-sharing platform. His blood ran cold as he read the description, recognizing it as a piece he had recorded in his villa just months earlier, never intending it for anyone's ears but his own. The world was changing. Artificial intelligence made it increasingly difficult to distinguish truth from fabrication. Some claimed the track was an AI creation, others insisted it was a previously unknown recording from his vault. But Michael knew the truth. In a moment of weakness, he had uploaded the song himself, unable to bear keeping his music locked away any longer. As he sat in his darkened study that night, watching the debate about the song's authenticity spread across social media, Michael Jackson faced the first real challenge to his carefully constructed exile. The music had betrayed him, or perhaps he had betrayed himself. Either way, the sequence of events he had set in motion 15 years ago was beginning to unravel. His phone buzzed, a secure message from his security chief, one of the few people who knew the truth. "We need to talk. The song is gaining traction. Major labels are investigating its origin. We may need to consider our options." Michael walked to his window, looking out over the twinkling lights of Nice below. In the reflection of the glass, he caught a glimpse of his transformed face, the face of Marcus Jensen. But beneath that carefully crafted disguise, the heart of Michael Jackson beat stronger than ever, pulsing with the rhythm of suppressed music and untold stories. He picked up his phone and typed a simple response, "Set up the call. It's time to discuss the future." As he pressed send, Michael realized that his years of peaceful anonymity might be coming to an end. The question was no longer whether the world would discover his secret, but how he would choose to reveal it. The stage was set for an unprecedented return, but first, he would have to confront the very reasons that drove him into hiding in the first place. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled midnight, its deep resonance seeming to mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Michael Jackson, the man the world believed dead, stood at the threshold of a decision that would once again reshape not just his life, but the very nature of truth, celebrity, and redemption in the modern age. The Hidden King would soon face his greatest performance yet, the art of coming back to life. The secure video call took place in Michael's basement studio, a room he had soundproofed and equipped with state-of-the-art technology. James Morrison, his former security chief and one of the architects of his disappearance, appeared on the screen looking considerably older but still sharp-eyed and alert. "The audio analysis labs are going crazy over your song, Michael," James began without preamble. "They're running every possible test. AI detection, voice pattern analysis, spectral comparison with your known recordings. Some of the results are inconclusive." Michael leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming absently on the desk. "What are they saying?" "Half the experts claim it's an AI creation, but the other half insist there are nuances in the vocal performance that no AI could replicate. Your daughter Paris has been particularly vocal about it. She posted a video yesterday saying she feels something deeply familiar in the voice, something that reminds her of private moments when you used to sing to her as a child." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He hadn't intended for his children to become involved, but he should have known better. Paris had always been perceptive, even as a small child. "There's more," James continued. "Someone claiming to be a former maintenance worker at your villa has come forward. Says they've heard music late at night, music that couldn't be recordings because the arrangements were different. The local papers are starting to dig." Michael stood and paced the room, his reflection catching in the glass of gold and platinum records that lined the walls, awards from another life, secretly transported to his sanctuary. "What are our options? We can discredit the maintenance worker, spread some counter-rumors, muddy the waters. But Michael..." James paused, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe it's time to consider a controlled revelation. On your terms." The idea hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Michael walked to his piano, letting his fingers rest lightly on the keys without pressing them. "I need to test the waters first," he said finally. "See how the world has changed, if it's changed at all." Over the next few weeks, Michael began a careful campaign of exploration. As Marcus Jensen, he started frequenting local jazz clubs in Nice, occasionally sitting in on piano for a song or two. He deliberately incorporated subtle hints of his distinctive style, a familiar chord progression here, a characteristic rhythm there. Just enough to make some people wonder, not enough to be certain. He also began writing letters, anonymously, to people from his past. To Berry Gordy, the Motown patriarch who had shaped his early career. To Quincy Jones, who had helped create his greatest albums. To old friends who had stood by him through difficult times. The letters contained details only the real Michael Jackson could know, each one ending with a cryptic hint about renewal and return. The responses were varied and fascinating. Some recipients immediately went public with the letters, sparking new waves of speculation. Others kept quiet but began making discreet inquiries through private channels. The music industry buzzed with rumors and theories. But it was the reaction of his children that affected him most deeply. Prince, Paris, and Blanket, now preferring to be called BG, had grown into remarkable adults, each carrying a piece of his legacy while forging their own paths. Through his extensive surveillance network, Michael watched as they responded to the growing rumors with a mixture of hope, skepticism, and barely concealed pain. One evening, as he watched Paris give an interview about the mysterious song, she said something that shook him to his core. "If my father is somehow out there, watching this, and sometimes I feel in my heart that he is. I want him to know that we understand. We understand the pressure, the scrutiny, the impossible expectations. We've felt it too. And we would love him just the same, maybe even more, if he had chosen to walk away from it all." The interview brought tears to Michael's eyes. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a real reunion with his children. Not as the king of pop, not as the legendary Michael Jackson, but as a father who had made an impossible choice in impossible circumstances. However, as his presence in the jazz clubs began to draw more attention, and as the letters sparked increasingly serious investigations, Michael discovered that emerging from hiding would be more complicated than he had imagined. A young journalist from Le Monde had started connecting the dots, tracking Marcus Jensen's appearances and musical style. More worryingly, a private detective hired by one of the letter recipients had been spotted asking questions in Nice. The situation came to a head when Michael received an unmarked envelope at his villa. Inside was a photograph of him playing piano at one of the jazz clubs, alongside a picture of himself from 2009, with key facial features circled and compared. A note accompanied the photos: "I know who you are. But I also think I know why you did it. Let's talk." The letter was signed by Elena Dubois, the Le Monde journalist. She had included her phone number and a promise of absolute discretion. Michael spent a sleepless night in his studio, playing his old songs softly on the piano, wrestling with the decision. His security team could easily have Elena discredited or scared off the story. He could disappear again, move to another country, create a new identity. But as dawn broke over the Mediterranean, he found himself reaching for his phone. His fingers hovered over the keypad as the weight of the moment pressed down on him. This single phone call could change everything. The world he had built as Marcus Jensen, the peace he had found in anonymity, the protection he had crafted for his children, all of it hung in the balance. Outside his window, a new day was beginning. Fishing boats headed out to sea, their lights twinkling in the early morning darkness. Somewhere in Los Angeles, his children were going about their lives, carrying the weight of his absence. In studios around the world, producers were analyzing his new song, trying to determine its authenticity. And in a small office in Nice, a journalist was waiting for a call that would either come or not. Michael Jackson, hidden king of pop, took a deep breath and began to dial. The Café d'Artistes sat perched on a quiet corner of Old Nice, its faded awning and weathered facade making it easy to overlook. Michael had chosen it carefully, a place frequented by locals rather than tourists, where the afternoon crowd consisted mainly of elderly men playing chess and young artists sketching in worn notebooks. Elena Dubois arrived precisely on time, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing clothes that deliberately blended into the background. Michael, watching from his corner table, recognized the careful attention to anonymity. It was something he had mastered himself over the years. "Monsieur Jensen," she said quietly, sliding into the seat across from him. Her eyes moved over his face with professional intensity, studying the masterful prosthetics that had become his second skin. "Or should I say?" Michael raised his hand slightly. "Marcus is fine, for now." His voice was pitched slightly higher than his natural tone, part of the carefully constructed persona of Marcus Jensen. "I understand you've been investigating me." Elena nodded, placing a thick folder on the table between them. "For 6 months. Ever since you played Human Nature at Le Petit Jazz one night. The arrangement was different, but something in the interpretation." She paused, choosing her words carefully. Only someone who lived inside that song could have played it that way. Michael felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the sensation that had accompanied every near discovery over the years. But there was something different this time. Elena's eyes held no judgment, no hunger for sensation. Instead, he saw genuine curiosity and something else: understanding. "Why did you contact me directly?" he asked. "You could have published your findings, made a name for yourself." Elena pulled a photograph from her folder. It showed a young Michael Jackson, perhaps 9 or 10, performing with his brothers. "Because I grew up watching a child being forced to live his life in public. Because I saw what that spotlight did to you, year after year." She slid another photo across the table, a recent shot of Marcus Jensen walking alone on the beach at sunrise. "And because I saw in these pictures something I never saw in photographs of Michael Jackson: peace, Over the next 3 hours, as the cafe slowly emptied and filled again, Michael Jackson told his story. He spoke of the suffocating pressure of fame, the constant scrutiny, the impossible expectations. He described the elaborate plan to fake his death, the careful selection of his new identity, the years of learning to live as a different person. Elena listened intently, taking no notes, recording nothing. Only when he finished did she ask the question that hung between them: why now? Why risk breaking your silence? Michael gestured to the piano that sat unused in the corner of the cafe. Because music isn't just what I do, it's who I am. These past 15 years, I've written hundreds of songs, created entire albums that no one has heard. I thought I could live with that, but... He trailed off, his fingers moving unconsciously as if playing keys in the air. The song you leaked, Elena said. It wasn't an accident, was it? No, Michael admitted. I told myself it was, but... I think I wanted to be found. By the right person, in the right way. As evening approached, they began to discuss the possibility of a controlled revelation. Elena proposed a series of articles, carefully crafted to prepare the public while protecting Michael's privacy. But as they talked, an urgent message arrived from James Morrison. Paris Jackson had booked a flight to Nice. She's not coming for vacation, James's message read. She's been in contact with some of the people you wrote to. She's connecting the dots. Michael felt the world shift beneath him. His daughter, his precious Paris, was coming to find him. The careful plans he and Elena had been making suddenly seemed inadequate, too slow, too controlled. I need to see her first, he said to Elena. Before any articles, before any announcements. I owe her that. Elena nodded, understanding. But you'll need to move quickly. Once she's here, others will follow. The media, the fans. Then help me prepare, Michael said, his voice taking on a tone of authority that had lain dormant for 15 years. Help me do this right. Over the next 48 hours, Michael Jackson and Elena Dubois worked tirelessly. They drafted statements, planned secure locations, coordinated with James Morrison's security team. But more importantly, Michael began the process of becoming himself again. In his villa's studio, he stood before a mirror as his longtime makeup artist carefully removed the prosthetics that had made him Marcus Jensen. Layer by layer, the disguise fell away. The graying temples, the altered nose, the carefully crafted laugh lines, all dissolved to reveal what lay beneath. The face that emerged was not the Michael Jackson of 2009. Age had left its mark, gentler perhaps than it might have under the spotlight, but present nonetheless. Lines creased the corners of his eyes, earned through years of genuine smiles rather than surgical perfection. His hair had begun to gray naturally at the temples, no longer hidden under dye or wigs. As the last of Marcus Jensen fell away, Michael studied his reflection. For the first time in 15 years, he was looking at himself, not the king of pop, not the tabloid caricature, not the carefully constructed alias, but simply Michael Jackson, a 65-year-old man who had chosen to step away from his own legend. Tomorrow, his daughter would land in Nice. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of stepping back into a world he had left behind. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, in his studio, Michael Jackson did something he hadn't done in 15 years, he danced as himself. No restraint, no hiding his signature moves, no pretending to be less than he was. As he moved, the years seemed to fall away, and in the mirror, he caught glimpses of every version of himself, the child star, the king of pop, Marcus Jensen, and now this new person he was becoming. The sun was setting over the Mediterranean when he finally stopped, his breathing heavy, his heart pounding with more than just physical exertion. On his phone, a message from Elena glowed. Paris's flight lands at 9 a.m. Are you ready? Michael looked once more at his reflection, at the face he had hidden for so long, and typed his response, as ready as I'll ever be. In less than 12 hours, he would embrace his daughter for the first time in 15 years. The thought filled him with equal parts joy and terror. How would she react? What would she say? Could she forgive him? The hidden king was about to remove his crown of anonymity, and there would be no going back. Nice Côte d'Azur Airport buzzed with early morning activity as Paris Jackson's plane touched down. James Morrison's security team had arranged for her to exit through a private terminal, avoiding the usual arrival gates. They weren't taking any chances. If the paparazzi caught wind of her presence in Nice, the whole carefully orchestrated reunion could unravel. Michael watched the airport security feeds from a private room adjacent to the terminal, his heart pounding. Paris had grown so much in 15 years, but he could still see the little girl he'd left behind in her face, in the way she carried herself. She wore no disguise, no attempt to hide who she was, something he found both brave and telling. "She's alone," Elena confirmed, watching the feeds beside him. "No press, no entourage." "Just as we hoped." Michael nodded, unable to speak. He had removed all traces of Marcus Jensen. Today, he wore a simple black shirt and slacks, his now naturally graying hair tied back neatly. The face that would greet his daughter would be his own, aged by time but honest. Paris was escorted through the private terminal by airport security, her steps quick but uncertain. She carried only a small backpack. She had packed light, prepared to leave quickly if this proved to be another false lead. Michael had seen that look before, the guarded hope that tried to protect against disappointment. When she entered the private room, there was a moment of absolute stillness. Paris stood in the doorway, her hand frozen on the handle, her eyes locked on her father's face. Michael remained seated, giving her space, letting her process what she was seeing. "Daddy?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Michael stood slowly, tears already flowing freely down his face. "Paris," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. She moved forward as if in a trance, her hand reaching out to touch his face. When her fingers made contact with his skin, feeling the real warmth there, something broke inside her. With a sob, she collapsed into his arms. They held each other for what seemed like hours, crying, laughing, touching faces and hands as if to confirm this wasn't a dream. Elena and the security team quietly left the room, giving father and daughter the privacy they deserved. "I knew," Paris said finally, her voice muffled against his chest. "Somehow, I always knew. There were so many little things that didn't add up. And then that song." She pulled back to look at his face. "That was really you, wasn't it? You wrote it here?" Michael nodded, leading her to sit beside him. "I wrote it thinking about you, about all of you. About everything I missed. Why didn't you?" She started, then stopped herself. "No, I understand why. I've lived with fame my whole life. I've seen what it does to people. But Daddy..." Her voice caught. "We could have kept your secret. We would have protected you." "I know that now," Michael said softly. "But back then, I was so afraid. Afraid of the pressure crushing you like it crushed me. Afraid of the world twisting your lives like it twisted mine. I thought if everyone believed I was gone, you could live your own lives, be your own people." Paris squeezed his hand. "We did. But we never stopped missing you. Prince is a producer now, did you know? And BG, he's making documentary films. We each found our own way to stay connected to art, to music, to you." As they talked, catching up on 15 years of missed moments, Michael felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. But there was still more to discuss. "Paris," he said carefully, "Elena, the journalist who helped arrange this, she and I have been planning how to tell the world. But seeing you here, holding you again..." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm ready to come back, but not as the king of pop. Not as the Michael Jackson everyone thinks they knew. I want to come back as myself, as your father, as a musician who chose life over legend." Paris studied his face, seeing the peace there, the clarity of purpose. "The world's different now, Daddy. People understand more about mental health, about the price of fame. Your story, choosing to step away, choosing to live, it could help so many people. But it could also put you all back in the spotlight," Michael worried. "You, Prince, BG." Paris laughed, a sound so like her childhood self that it made Michael's heart ache. "Daddy, we're already in the spotlight. We've learned to handle it, to use it for good. Let us help you do the same." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent knock. Elena entered, her face tense. "I'm sorry," but we have a situation. Someone at the airport recognized Paris. Social media is exploding with speculation about why she's in Nice. And she hesitated. Prince and BG are both booking flights here. Michael and Paris looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. The careful plans for a controlled revelation were dissolving, but perhaps that wasn't a bad thing. Perhaps the truth needed to come out in its own way, guided by love rather than strategy. Call them, Michael said to Paris. Tell them to come. Tell them. He took a deep breath. Tell them their father is waiting. Paris pulled out her phone, her hands shaking slightly. As she dialed Prince's number, Michael walked to the window, looking out over the city that had given him sanctuary for so long. The hidden king was about to step into the light, not with a grand performance or carefully orchestrated media event, but with a simple family reunion. And somehow, that felt exactly right. Behind him, he heard Paris's voice, thick with emotion. Prince? You need to come to Nice. Right now. Dad's here. He's really here. And he's ready to come home. The villa's great room had never felt so full of life. Prince arrived first, walking through the door with the confident stride of a man who had built his own legacy in the music industry, then freezing at the sight of his father. BG arrived hours later, his filmmaker's eye taking in every detail of the emotional scene before him. The reunions were tear-filled, intense, years of unspoken words flowing out in rushes of emotion and long, tight embraces. As the Mediterranean sun set on that extraordinary day, the Jackson family sat together in Michael's music studio, surrounded by the instruments and recording equipment that had been his sole audience for 15 years. The walls were lined with journals filled with unused songs, each one a piece of his hidden journey. This is incredible, Prince said, leafing through one of the journals. These compositions. Dad, the world needs to hear these. But on your terms this time, BG added quickly, protective even now. No contracts, no 50-show commitments, no pressure. Michael looked at his children, no longer children, but strong, capable adults who understood both the power and the danger of fame. They had survived their own journeys under the spotlight's glare, emerging with wisdom he wished he'd had at their age. Elena, who had been quietly observing the family reunion, stepped forward with her laptop. The social media speculation is getting intense. Paris's presence in Nice, followed by Prince and BG, people are putting it together. We need to make a decision about how to proceed. Michael stood and walked to his piano, running his fingers lightly over the keys. For 15 years, I've been playing music just for myself, finding joy in creation without the weight of the world's expectations. I don't want to lose that. He turned to face his family. But I don't want to hide anymore either. Over the next few hours, they crafted a plan together. Not the careful, controlled revelation that Elena had originally envisioned, but something more organic, more true to who Michael had become. The next morning, a simple video appeared on Paris's social media accounts. It showed an intimate scene, Michael at his piano in the villa's studio, his children gathered around him. His face was clear, aged naturally, bearing the lines of both joy and sorrow. He wore no stage costume, no makeup, just simple clothes and his own skin. Hello, he said to the camera, his voice soft but steady. Many of you thought I died 15 years ago. The truth is, I chose to live instead. To really live, for the first time in my life. He began to play, his fingers finding the keys of human nature, but in the new arrangement he'd developed during his years as Marcus Jensen. His children joined in, Paris harmonizing, Prince adding subtle production elements, BG capturing it all with an artist's eye. The song transformed from what the world knew into something deeper, richer, more real. The internet exploded. Within hours, the video had millions of views. News organizations scrambled to verify, to understand, to report. But Michael remained in his villa, surrounded by his family, letting the world process the revelation in its own way. Elena's article was published the next day in Le Monde, telling the full story with sensitivity and understanding. Other publications followed, each adding pieces to the puzzle. Some praised his courage in choosing life over legend. Others debated the ethics of his deception. But the overwhelming response was one of amazement and, surprisingly, respect. In the weeks that followed, Michael began sharing his new music, not through a major label, but through independent releases curated by Prince's production company. The songs were different from his earlier work, reflecting both his years of solitude and his hard-won peace. They spoke of transformation, of learning to live without the mask, of finding strength in vulnerability. He gave only one interview, a quiet conversation filmed in his villa's garden, with all three of his children participating. He spoke honestly about mental health, about the toll of child stardom, about the courage it takes to walk away from what the world expects of you. "I didn't die in 2009, he explained. "I was reborn. And now, I'm being reborn again, not as the king of pop, but as something more precious to me, a father, a musician, a man who has learned that the greatest stage of all is the one where you can simply be yourself." Fans gathered outside the villa, not with the frenzied energy of the past, but with candles and quiet songs. They came not to demand performances or appearances, but to show support for his journey. Many shared their own stories of choosing to step away from paths that were destroying them, of finding the courage to begin again. Michael did eventually perform again, but on his own terms. Small venues, intimate settings, where he could see every face in the audience and share not just his music but his story. He played a mixture of his classic hits and his new compositions, each reworked to reflect who he had become. The music industry had to adjust to this new paradigm, a legendary artist who refused to be legendary, who chose authenticity over spectacle. Some promoters offered astronomical sums for world tours or Las Vegas residencies, but Michael declined them all. His performances remained small, personal, and utterly real. 1 year after his return, Michael sat in his villa's garden with Paris, watching the sunset. "Do you ever regret coming back?" she asked. Michael smiled, the expression genuine and unconstrained. "I regret the years I lost with you and your brothers," he said. "But I don't regret learning to live without the crown. Sometimes you have to lose yourself completely to find out who you really are." Inside, he could hear Prince working on a new track in the studio, while BG set up his camera equipment for their next family documentary session. The sound of fans singing softly outside the gates drifted up on the evening breeze, not Thriller or Billie Jean, but one of his new songs about redemption and rebirth. The hidden king had emerged from his exile, not to reclaim his throne, but to build something far more precious, a life of his own choosing, surrounded by the love of his family and the quiet respect of a world that had learned, as he had, that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply being yourself. In the end, Michael Jackson didn't resurrect a legend. Instead, he did something far more extraordinary: he became real.
Tell us in the comments what part of this story impressed you the most. If you liked it, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next videos. See you in the world of incredible events.